We come now to a cousin, or at least a very close relative, the Vienna game, where white plays 2 knight c3. Now, I believe that against the Vienna, black's soundest move is just to play knight f6, also the sharpest move and the most promising move too. We are not afraid of, as I say, the closest cousin to the King's Gambit, the Vienna Gambit with f4, and I believe leaving options open for black with the c-pawn, in particular the option of, if necessary, going c6 and then d5 is profitable for black. Why block the c-pawn with knight c6 when you don't need to? Well, there are various options for white after knight f6, and of course the sharpest one is f4. As we've just been dwelling on the King's Gambit, it makes sense to look at this first. And black should reply with d5. That is the tried and trusted move, and it's a move which achieves good results for white. Has to take on e5 in this position. We get knight takes e4 coming. And now there are 2 moves. White can either play knight f3, which is the, if you like, the safest move, or he goes d3, entering into sharp complications. Either way, black is absolutely fine. Now, in the first game I'm going to show you, in fact it's an extremely recent game as I record this. It was played in the Siegerman tournament on the 16th of May 2012 between Grandmasters Johnny Hector and Fabio Caruna. Hector, of course, is a very romantic player, and it's no surprise to see him at the helm of some sharp variation in the open game. He's been doing this, you know, throughout his entire life. He enjoys this type of fight. Here he finds Caruna on top form. Obviously after knight f3, black has loads of choice. Bishop e7 is a very decent move. Black has bishop f5. There are lots of moves. Caruna chooses a straightforward move. He just gets his pieces out. He plays knight c6, and after bishop to b5, he goes bishop b4, and both sides castle. So now white has to ask himself, well, what do I have in this position? What have I got? The point of bishop b4 was to tie down that pawn and make it difficult for white to clarify the position in the centre. If white pushes the d pawn, black's going to snap off that pawn on c3 and actually win something. So white has got a fairly awkward choice to make here. Note that he cannot make use of the open f-file in this particular position. Black is absolutely fine. Hector went knight to e2, making room, one presumes, for ideas such as c3. Well, Caruna continued to develop his pieces. This is the type of straightforward play I like in the open game, rapid pointed development. Try and create threats as you go along, but on no account play passively. This is the ethos we're trying to incorporate into our game as we go through this e4, e5 repertoire. And perhaps slightly surprisingly, Hector decided to take on c6 straight away. Now, in order to try and understand why he does this, it's worthwhile examining c3, because that looks like the most natural move, and then I think black should certainly drop his bishop back to e7. Well, again, you take a look at this position and you really think to yourself, well, white hasn't got anything here. You know, black's got a very nice, comfortable game. If white plays d3, then I imagine black can just play knight g5 with pressure. If he goes bishop takes c6 now, and then d3, we can even drop our knight back to c5. And if bishop e3, queen d7, knight e d4, a5, something like this, black is absolutely fine out of the opening. Bishop pair and a nice position. So Hector, going back to the game, took on c6, and he put his king in the corner, presumably taking away some of black's supposed tactics. Caruna went knight g5, and now white went d3, whereupon black played f6. That's always the slight drawback in having this pawn on e5. It is subject to being undermined, and this is the effect of the move f6 in this position. If black were to leave that pawn on e5 for any length of time, then it could actually obstruct him in his natural development. So Caruna hits hard before white gets fully developed. Now, I presume the reason he plays this complicating move is precisely that. He wants a difficult position. He wants to get to a position where he can outplay Johnny Hector. There was a simpler way here, just by taking on f3 and then going bishop f5. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I presume he didn't do this because of knight d4, queen d7, well, maybe white could just take that bishop off and thereby make a draw. Karuna's f6 is anti-drawish and promotes an unbalanced position. Just taking this on a little bit, as I say, white could have taken on f5 in this position, perhaps queen e2, rook a, e8. If he insists on playing for a sharp position, then I think this tends to favour black. But as I say, white could have taken on f5 a couple of moves ago. Certainly this position here is pretty good for black. So Karuna could have played that way. Instead he plays f6. This allows Hector to take on g5, play c3. Now we get a very unbalanced position here. Again, it should be okay for black, but it's much sharper than before. So after queen a4, black went bishop d7. Knight d2. Well, you would think that a move like bishop d7 invites the sharp response e6, bishop e8, queen g4, something like this. But has white really got any threats in this position? For instance, what if black plays c5 here, confidently taking charge in the centre of the board? If white goes c4, can we play h5 and drive white back, rook b8 and then rook b6, something like this? You cast your eye around for a white threat. It's not immediately obvious how white is going to proceed in a position like this. So I've no doubt at all that Hector would have looked at e6 for quite some time. In the end, he decides to go knight d2, but this is rather passive and allows black to take over the position. Karuna comes forward with his c5. Hector takes on f8, simplifying, and plays queen b3, but this doesn't interrupt the natural flow of the bishop pair. Bishop f5 was answered by c4, and throughout this game, Karuna plays very energetically. He hits the queen, he blocks the centre, and now queen e8, targeting that pawn on e5. At no stage has that pawn ever been a threat to Karuna. Knight g3 was answered by bishop g6, and rook e1 by g4, cramping white on the king side. h3. Well, that is a rather miserable looking move, but I suppose Hector could see possible back rank tricks coming up, and he decided to try and free up his back rank. I mean, I think black's plan in this position is just to target that pawn, something like this, rook b8 to b6 and then rook e6. Very difficult for white, now that the f3 square has been taken away from the knight by the pawn on g4, to actually protect that pawn. If he goes knight b3 in this position, then queen a4 is a good move. Again, getting active, and white's position looks very uncoordinated to me. So Hector went h3, queen e6, takes. You have to ask yourself, has this helped white in any way? Well, I don't think so. And black continues to enjoy a great deal of activity here. Karuna shunted his bishop over to h4. Queen d1, even the exchange of the queens did not halt the black initiative. Bishop h5 pinning, bishop g5. That's the final triumph of the bishop pair over the knight pair in this position. White is simply losing material, and so he decided to resign. So our first investigation into the move f4 shows that whilst it's an idea which must be given respect, black's simple idea of d5 and then knight takes e4, in this case after knight f3, knight c6, followed by quick development of the bishops, gives him very satisfactory play. Well, let's continue our survey of the Vienna Gambit, the closest cousin really to the King's Gambit that I think is known in opening theory. We're playing d5, that's the approved move. White takes on e5, black takes on e4 with a nice fluid game. And now let's just take a look at the Oxford variation with d3, which I don't think troubles black unduly as long as he sticks to the basics. In fact, I'm going to show you a nice effective way of turning the tables on white in this line. The first point to note is that when white plays d3, he just wants black to get involved in the crazy positions that arise after queen h4 check. Then white goes g3, black takes on g3, knight f3, queen h5, and now knight takes d5. I strongly recommend you do not touch this variation with black at all. White wins most of the games. A crazy position arises in the main line, and that's exactly what white wants. You're playing into his hands if you play this variation. I never believe that playing into the enemy hands is a good idea, and so we're going to stick with the sensible knight takes c3 in this position, and then pawn up to c5. I believe this is an excellent way of playing this line, and gives black a very good position. The main line goes knight f3, knight c6, bishop e2, bishop e7, and now white castles, after which black plays bishop e6. Well, this is, in my opinion, a very sensible way to play for black. Black's retaining flexibility about castling. He hasn't committed his king yet. He could easily go long, and as I've marked out on the board there, black's thinking about playing g5. I used this plan very effectively in, I remember an early game that I played as a young man, and this was at club level. The white player just did not expect that black would play g5 in this position. White thinks he's got a right to the initiative here. His main plan in this position is to go queen e1, get the queen out to g3, and start an attack against the black king. But what if black hasn't castled on the king side? So it turns out that actually queen e1, I wouldn't say it's a mistake in this position, but certainly going on with queen g3 is just no good. Black goes g4, and wherever white puts his knight, black's following up with h5, with what I think is a terrific position. Black's going to go queen d7, he's going to cast on the queen side, and he's just going to get on with the king side pawn storm. h4, big attack. That's how quickly white can slip into a poor position in this line. There was an old game, Olsen versus Johansson, Helsingborg, 1991, where after queen e1 g5, white went c4. But black just took it. Rook b1, knight b4, and already black had the better position. White played king h1, black played g4, knight d2, c takes d3, takes, black was on top. So going back to our featured game, which brings me to our featured game, Bilsell versus Gawain's. This is an old correspondence game. White played d4, trying to create some action in the centre. And now black could easily go on with the plan g5 here. This is very reasonable. Something like g4, queen d7, with the same ideas. I suppose white's got slightly better chances in this position than he had in the other line. Point number one, he's retained the d3 square for his knight. Point number two, he's already got the rook on a half open file, and possibly he can play bishop h6 here, which interrupts black's plan of h5. But even here, you know, castles g3, rook h d8, queen d2, queen c7, threatening queen to a5. This is okay for black. Gawain's approach in the game is more measured and deserves our attention. Black played h6, white went bishop e3, and now black blocked the position with c4. This reminds me of certain variations of the French, where you get this pawn formation in the centre, except that, of course, black's got no bad pieces. In the French, you often have this bad light square bishop jamming up the works. Well, here, no such jam exists, and therefore, after rook b1, queen d7, queen e1, castles on the queen side, black already has a very comfortable game, and a very superior version of the French defence, if you can call it that. Bilsell went queen g3, and now seeing nothing, black just went on with the g5 plan. Now, this is a very easy plan to remember, you have to admit, and as you can see, he's turning the tables, because white has no initiative in this position. Black has numerous plans. Black is, well, the first plan is obvious. Black wants to swing the rook across to g8 and then just get on with the kingside pawn storm. The second plan, less obvious, is that actually black can play this position strategically, and he can even think of ideas such as knight a5 followed by queen a4. White has definite problems here with his queenside pawn configuration. So I think what I'm saying is this is actually a much more easy position for black to play than white, and therefore it's no surprise to see that in our featured game white slipped to defeat very quickly. Well, Gawain's played carefully. He first of all concentrated on securing his king position. He put his king on a8, rook fb1, and now rook b8. This is the type of play that often baffles club players. I mean, why is black, fiddling around with stuff like this? Well, he just says, well, my position's just better than yours. Black's just saying, you've got numerous weaknesses on the queen side. All I have to do is secure my king position, and then I can go over to taking off your pawns. And that's exactly what happens in this game, as Gawain finds the excellent manoeuvre bishop d8 and then bishop a5. Then he plays knight d8. Well, white's got problems all over the shop. He tried rook f1. Black took on a4. Rook b1. Maybe hoping for ideas such as rook a1 and then something like rook fb1. In a correspondence game, you can't really hope to get away with that play. And after queen d7, bishop f2, knight c6, Bill Sell decided to resign, rather than waste any further time playing on this position. Okay, in an over-the-board game, you wouldn't resign this position as white, but white absolutely has no play whatsoever in this position. He's got the worst pawn structure. He's a pawn down. Black will just surely grind him down in this position. And in the correspondence game, you might be suffering for years in this position. So that's why white packed it in. So summarising, just going back to the opening, as long as black keeps it rational, the Oxford variation with d3 is no big deal. Black should take on c3, and then just go c5, getting the pieces out nice and easily, something like this, and then thinking about the move g5, which would quite take the wind out of white's sails.